The year is 2020. My lazy ass is getting paid to sit at home while the whole world hides from coronavirus or does everything they can to spread it. While I do have a mountain of hobbies to keep me busy, I don't just exist to be productive 24/7. Sure, I could spend the next 2 to 4 months making the album of my life, but this may be the only time in my life I ever get to take a legitimate 2-month break. At this point, burnout had been proving a need that I desperately had. I needed more than just hobbies. I needed a time sink. Many people turn to Animal Crossing. I'll admit, I was playing this too, but I needed something with goals. Something that had an end in sight, mirroring how I felt about the pandemic itself. I had been told many times about a game that's truly incredible. One of the best ever, but also the kind of game you would have to have no life for a couple months if you decided to make a run at. Well, what better time to do that than in the middle of a global pandemic, right? Where to even begin with this game? I have to preface this with the fact that this will not be a normal review. It can't be. This game took me over 200 hours to complete the first time through. Most games I play land me between a 10 and 30 minute review. If it's short, I kind of just dump everything and haphazardly organize. If it's really big like Donkey Kong 64, I name all the files, I have multiple timelines worth of stuff, and I combine them all for the end. For Persona 5 though, I gotta go a step beyond that. Like every time a section of the game is completed, I make a separate folder with the footage. Otherwise, I really have no idea how I would manage a review like this. Seeing how Persona 5 literally got me through the pandemic, I had no problem picking it up and starting from the beginning. I felt more like any other game I was playing at the time that it was a game I really wanted to talk about. So without further ado, this is my review of Persona 5. Now, I'm not very well versed in anime, but I can definitely draw parallels in a lot of ways to the style of storytelling they're going for here. A humble youngin' gets a superpower-like ability, and through the lens of his teenage brain, has to make moral decisions. In Death Note, for example, Light can write the name of someone in the book, and they will die in the way he specifies. So, he decides to play God in an effort to make the world a better place. The majority of the plot involves him working to take people down while outsmarting law enforcement in the process. You've got your power, the Death Note, the moral dilemma, who to kill, should you be killing in the name of good, and the outer conflict, which would be his dodging of law enforcement.
Take a potato chip and eat it.
Basically trying not to get caught. In Persona 5, the story revolves around you, a high school student under probation for assaulting a powerful man who is trying to force himself onto a woman. Very early on, the adult figures in the story tell him, against what feels much like better judgment, to keep his head down and keep out of other people's business.
That's what you get for sticking your nose in a matter between two adults. You did injure him, yeah?
From here, he discovers a power to enter other people's palaces, which contain their distorted desires. Each of these areas are where the more RPG-based elements come into play. In these areas, you kind of turn into a superhero. If you steal the treasure of someone with distorted desires from their palace, they lose their distorted desires and change as a person. Since their prior actions still remain though, their overwhelming shame pretty much causes them to have a mental breakdown and confess all their wrongdoing. You've got your power, the ability to infiltrate people's palaces, your moral dilemma, who should you turn, should you be turning people, and your outer conflict, dodging law enforcement again. We're introduced to the palaces pretty early on. These things are so elaborate that even the introductory palace, the one designed to teach you what the fuck you're doing, was like a 20-hour ordeal for me the first time around. It may sound daunting, but the execution of story and mechanics were so enticing that I was kind of hooked anyway. You're a new student at this school, so you're not super familiar with the layout and where the school is supposed to be. Instead, there's a castle. Here, we meet Morgana, who kind of explains things and helps show you around. Ryuji also gets caught up in it and enters the fray. We find some students being tortured, and an overall pretty gross representation of the gym teacher and his relation to the students. I don't want to get too into the more upsetting parts of the game, aside from its importance to the story, but I'm going to give the content warning here. Sex assault, abuse, and suicide are both part of the game here. More specifically, the gym teacher runs a very toxic sports culture. He physically abuses the students to try to get better performances out of them. He lusts after the female students, pushes one of them to attempt suicide, and shows the totality of his gross behavior in his introductory scenes. These scenes represent the corruption of his heart. We're pretty much getting a picture of what's in his head. Later, we meet him in real life, and he comes off a lot more charming, though something is clearly off. An, one of the students he's particularly lusting after, ends up discovering the palace and joining the cause.
I forget that chick's name, but it's your fault she jumped, you know.
Huh?
You were so reluctant to throw yourself onto me that I had her take your place.
You bastard!
She's exposed to his horrifying thoughts about her, and from this point, she's determined to help your team unmask him. You explore his palace to uncover his abusive behavior, eventually stealing his treasure and causing him to have a change of heart. Then he completely caves under the feeling of guilt and fesses up to everything he's done. It's a lot for a starter palace, but it's just the tip of the iceberg in this game. The way this story unfolds provides a very interesting hybrid gaming experience of sorts. It plays out like an RPG as well as sort of a life and dating sim game while you build relationships with people. I also give a bit of a sidebar that the quality of storytelling in these sections of the game is a lot higher than your average game providing this type of gameplay. During the day, you're a student at Shujin Academy. You have to answer questions based on Japanese culture, and I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this in the comments, but I googled most of the answers. That's before I figured out the network feature will give you the right answers anyway. The afternoon and evening section of the game are really where you're given choices, where a lot of the story tends to unfold during school sections of the day. Although, when essential story bits play out, they do like to use your afternoon spots a lot more between palaces. They give more than enough afternoon and evening spots for you to have the freedom to build things out, though. The number of storylines and side quests you can go through just feels endless. There's just so many people that you can build relationships with. However, there is a finite number of days that can be played in the game. Trust me, it's a lot. But that fact does mean that there's somewhat of a cap on how much of the game you can experience in one playthrough. This is pretty genius, to be honest. I will state in my own experience that the thought of starting a second playthrough, all while knowing what I had been through in the first, was pretty daunting. As a result, I picked up Royal since it had extra content and was only $30, and I was pleasantly surprised at how much was different this time around. In addition to the amount of content already being there, meaning the playthrough would be different anyway, a lot more required content had changed as well, adding new characters, some modified HUD elements, and even some layout changes in places I wasn't expecting. The life sim parts of the game have a time management component to them. Most of the activities you do will boost something. Get points for proficiency, guts, kindness, charm, and knowledge. Taking this burger eating contest, for example, will increase your guts. Taking a bath at the bathhouse increases your charm. I'm playing a game on a CRT where I'm watching a movie on a CRT. Kind of a waste though, I'm already maxed out. Things I do for jokes. Oh, I almost missed that part. You can also build your relationships between different characters, which will in turn upgrade your rank with them and grant you different abilities. Every single time you do any of these things, the day will progress from the afternoon to evening and evening to the following day, forcing you to prioritize which things you want to do since some of them are only available on certain days. You'll be prompted with multiple opportunities via text, and you'll constantly be making decisions based on this. It unfolds over a very long period of time and ultimately dictates what your unique run of the game might look like. But who cares about any of that? What really matters is, who can you date? If anyone watches this video, boy are some of you not gonna like this part. Now, I'll just come out and say it. I'm a serial dater. I love dating, a little too much. That phase where you're like, going on Tinder and scheduling a bunch of dates and getting all nervous, taking someone out to dinner or going to the movies and trying to learn about them so you can see if you want to take things further and like be a couple. In Persona 5, there's a crap load of women you can do this with. Like, all the women you can do story arcs with, basically, you can partner up with. Since most of the characters are under 18, a lot of the relationships are very high school-esque and cringe, and when they aren't, it's usually because they're morally questionable. Your doctor? Your teacher? Yeesh. You get rewarded heavily for dating your teacher, by the way. It's so bad. You get to farm experience during class, you get to assign tasks to her so you can do tasks while she does tasks. For example, you can have her do the laundry while you invite someone else you're dating to the room. Everyone you make friendships or relationships with gains you different perks and abilities to make yourself infinitely stronger to more ridiculous degrees, so naturally I maxed out as many relationships as humanly possible, and my cheater ass got a hilarious cutscene to basically reward me again with a nice laugh for doing it. This is wonderful. It's freaking wonderful. It is objectively wonderful, and I loved it. That said, I do have some critiques, exclusively for my LGBT folks out there. So like, if you're straight and you don't like gay people, I'm not sorry. I wish you could date the guys too. Obviously, you don't have to try to date everyone like I did. If I was being more judicious, I'd probably be more likely to date Makoto because she's intelligent and responsible and kind of a badass. Or Takami because low-key, not low-key, she's totally my type. And very much not want to date Futaba or An since they both come off very immature to me. The game made a point to state she's close to your age to compensate for this, and I find An really high school and cringe. Wouldn't it be fun to apply that same petty choice-making logic to the men in this game too? Come on, like, Ryuji totally has an anger problem and is pretty annoying.
How much do you have to add until you're satisfied, Gramps? I can't stand it anymore!
And says,
For real?
at literally everything, even when it doesn't make sense. Dude would be at an open casket funeral and say,
For real?
Yusuke is pretty eccentric and artsy, which is, you know, some good points for him. Though, he does have a weird sense of boundaries. They don't consider that, though. It's all gotta be traditional, women only. And speaking of traditional, why not include some opportunities for polyamorous situations? Wouldn't that be a fun story arc to interact with? Why couldn't I date Haru with Makoto's permission? I just think that would be fun and wild. Especially in a game filled with story arcs, thought experiments, and choices. I doubt they would put that kind of stuff in, but I think it would enrich the experience. So the gameplay inside Mementos is far from a go here and do this kind of thing. There's a crap load they put into the palaces to stretch both your puzzle solving skills as well as your spatial awareness skills. Take this puzzle in the third palace, for example, where you have to match the numbers and the letters. Not gonna lie, I used my phone to assist me on this one. There are plenty of other examples of this kind of puzzle solving throughout the game, and it works to enrich the experience. Futaba's Palace has you rearranging broken up pictures. Often when I review games, I'll talk about balance. Too much of the same type of gameplay can grow really stale, but too much variation can give you a sense that the game is throwing things at a wall to see what sticks. Take Paper Mario Origami King, for example, where the game does some things better than others. While Persona 5 doesn't have perfect execution on everything it attempts, it does succeed in having quite the excess of variety in gameplay styles and scenarios without any of the changes taking you out of the experience. It's varied, but also extremely consistent, thanks to the in-game schedule. As you play Persona 5, you're bound to the rules of each day being segregated into 3 parts, and the point of the calendar you fall on really dictating the flow of the story. As the story moves forward in time, a few important precedents are set. For example, the story can be both extremely controlled and linear, but also the world can be really big, really varied, very free in choice, and ultimately the player is setting the pace. There are so many variables that doing different things can have different effects on that. The feeling of freedom and choice is immense, and yet certain things are available to you on certain days. Certain plot points will be hit at certain times. You are required to complete specific tasks before you hit certain days on the calendar. It's an absolutely ingenious way of having your cake and eating it too, and in my opinion, succeeding in both. It's a parameter that gives the developers insane control over how things play out and how the game is experienced, but don't feel restrictive to the player. Oftentimes, linear games can feel restrictive, open games can feel messy, but this game is linear with the feeling of endless choice and endless possibilities. As you play through, you discover different ways to maximize your time. For example, near the beginning, you discover your teacher does a raunchy maid service and essentially bribe her into doing chores for you. Normally, these activities would take up a portion of the day in exchange for an item, but if you have her do it, you can have that item and keep doing that portion of the day to use on dating or doing another activity. Another aspect to the experience system is that you gain points for doing different things. Watching a certain type of movie, reading a certain type of book might give you guts, for example. Successfully answering a question in class will give you knowledge points. These help you in various ways throughout the game. All of it feeds into a loop that just keeps you coming back for more. So in spite of being such a long game, I just keep coming back to it. Because of all the different activities and connections this game provides, it's quite replayable. Believe it or not, I've replayed it 3 times now. My most recent playthrough being the Switch version of it. Forgivingly, they give you the option to fast forward dialogue and skip cutscenes, so you can take out a lot of the repetition. My only complaint is the fact that the beginning has hours worth of tutorial content that you can't really skip in spite of this. As a result, I don't usually do back-to-back playthroughs, but might wait a few months before picking it back up. It's a small blemish on an otherwise outstanding level of replayability though. Let's talk about the visuals. This game looks incredible. From front to back, foreground to background, head to toe, you get the idea. You know I'm always a fan of that cel-shaded cartoon design on the characters, but this game is teeming with life. Everywhere you go, you're going to find lively places with thoughtful design. There's a system where you collect personas and fuse them to make new and more powerful personas, and it's quite addictive. Different personas have different attacks and weaknesses, and the intricacies of all of this further enhances the game. I was going to go on a whole bit about how creative all the personas are, until I realized that the same monster designs are used in previous Persona games as well as other Atlus games. One of them I have to straight up censor because, it's an intentionally dick-shaped slime monster. There's no other way to put it, really. That's just what it is. I can't show that shit. So all of these things that I mentioned collectively have some kind of equal in other games, I'm sure, but The game's HUD, menu screens, and UI are truly standouts. Never have I seen menu screens this stylish, this sleek, this intuitive, and that's good because it's an RPG with a lot of information to sift through. So many games really just save their UI for the end or just slap something on there that they use in all their other games. Take the skill tree, the little bar thing at the top that tells you where things are, etc. I'm not going to say these forms of UI treatment don't work, but a game like Persona 5 shows how much more the UI can be in an intuitive and natural extension of the gameplay experience, especially in an RPG. When you're going to be interacting with text as much as you are, they have really clever ways of separating out the story into different stylistic branches that help vary up the gameplay experience, often leading to long gameplay sessions since it takes a lot longer to get bored. You could be fighting and clawing your way up a castle, then take a day to work on one of your romances, stock up, maybe more of the story comes around, and you get that in the form of cleverly designed text chats, an in-game cutscene, a much more cinematic in-game cutscene, or an animated cutscene. Having gone to film school and taken some documentary classes, this is actually very similar to a strategy some documentaries will use to vary up the pace and hold the viewer's attention. They may go from an interview with the subject to maybe following them around while they have them do stuff. Maybe they'll have some narration with an animation playing over it. Even taking the meta route and showing a little bit of the behind the scenes on the documentary process itself can help to create this kind of variation that will keep us engaged. Not that the content itself needs window dressing to keep it interesting, but I think Persona 5 is a masterclass in using this technique both from a gameplay, aesthetic, and entertainment perspective in the way we're consuming this content. This is a game that is really hard to put down. So how about the RPG part of this game? You know, the turn-based battles? Now, I want to show you what a turn-based battle might look like in a game that's more lazily put together, just to show you what an RPG might look like in its most basic form. Now, does that look like something you want to do all day? Hell no! So if you want to get a little more sophisticated than that, and I use that word lightly here, Pokemon considers different types, so water causes more damage on fire and so forth. A game like Kingdom Hearts plays with a lot of RPG concepts in a non-turn-based format. Super Paper Mario also does this. A game like Thousand Year Door or Bug Fables uses action commands on all the attacks. On this spectrum, where does Persona 5 fall? Well, watch this.
I'll reveal your true form.
Enough! Gunshot should hit its weakness. Hit their weakness! If you do a baton pass, you might be able to hit their weakness. Maybe you can hit their weakness. Finish this! Finish How's that?
Look at all this. Where do I even begin? There are hundreds of personas you can capture and fuse. My item inventory got embarrassing by the end because I mainly relied on the personas and their abilities. I only used the items when I got in trouble. There's an SP system where every persona attack uses a little. Physical attacks from the personas usually drain health instead. You'll find health boosting items everywhere, and your personas can also heal you and your party, but SP replenishing items are a little bit harder to obtain. You're given a number of days to complete a palace, and typically the challenge is to balance how much SP you can survive with across multiple days. After you finish a day at the palace, your next entrance replenishes your SP. I did notice Royals was a bit more forgiving with this, and I took full advantage of the ability to make the teacher brew you coffee and cook you curry and to farm a bunch of SP items, so my playthrough of Royals went a lot differently than my playthrough of the original. So, similar to something like Pokemon, most of your personas have some kind of weakness. The real name of the game is trying to create good matchups. The balance falls between a good 7 or 8 different elements, and there's usually a good clue on how things will go depending on the attack set. But sometimes the enemies will throw you a curveball. Like, the same partner who could have the attack they were weak to is also weak to the Like, the same partner who could have the attack set they would be weak to is also weak to the enemy's attack set. Once you've figured out an enemy's attack set, a battle with that enemy is super streamlined. Hitting L2 to get straight to their weakness. Once the enemies are weak, you get the choice to negotiate with them to gain their persona and add it to Joker's persona, demand money or an item out of them, or, in very stylish fashion, finish them off. It's a super intuitive and satisfying loop. So, how about the boss fights? Now, I don't want to spoil every boss, but needless to say, they all contribute something special. Every boss has an emotional connection to one of the characters, and they all require you to come up with more thoughtful strategies to beat them. It's not as simple as finding the weakness and attacking it. This is usually where I pull out my staff butts. Oh my god. Oh man, I'm losing it. Visually, too, there's a lot of flair to these. Take Say's Palace, for example. There's a mechanic on luck that dictates some of the rules in the early going, and the boss cheats. Once you catch her, you can shift the battle in your favor. Each boss is the culmination of all the themes presented throughout your time in the character's palace, thus bringing things full circle. I want to get back to the palaces for a second. Now, my background in gaming consists of a lot of adventure-type games. I'm a bit of a Zelda purist, and as much as I love RPGs, a lot of them fall short for me when it comes to the dungeon crawling experience, mainly because it ends up being a set of straightforward rooms, mainly set up to grind through some fights and face a boss at the end. They'll have some puzzles, but usually nothing crazy. Persona 5, on the other hand, actually manages to satisfy my dungeon crawling needs twofold. You don't just walk around rooms. You climb ledges, jump around chandeliers, sneak around on the roof, jump through windows, hookshot to the high ground, crawl through small spaces, find secret pathways, scout the environment for items, solve some picture puzzles, write down number combos and decode number-to-letter messages, step on the squares in the right order, watch the tapes to uncover the tortured memories of this man's past. The list goes on. The environments are all encapsulating. The A+ story ties it all together, and overall, this game should be a masterclass in how to lay out RPG dungeons properly. The imagination is endless, and they really pull out all the stops. You know, what else can I say? I've reviewed a ton of Paper Mario games, and this has kind of been the year of the RPG for me. I honestly think I found the perfect RPG, though. If I had a rating system, this game would be a perfect score. To this date, it might be the best game I've ever played. That's over all the Zelda games, including Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And with that, I think I'm out of gas, and out of reviews for the time being. So with that said, I've done a whole lot of reviews, and it takes me a long time to do each video, so this is probably going to be the last video that I upload for a really long time. So, that said, I hope you enjoyed, And I'm gonna go touch grass.